All right, so our this morning discussion, as you were introduced, is going to be the payables workflow. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sonsil Collymore, and we're going to actually walk through the payables transaction workflow process. Now, we are also going to walk through how you can build your own AP workflow. Now, workflow is one of those things that is kind of complicated when you're going to get started with it, only because you need to be able to identify what it is you want in your workflow, the steps involved, and basically who are the persons that the workflow needs to route to, all right, as part of your processes. It may go to person A because of this reason. The invoice needs to be approved for a certain amount. If it's less than a certain amount, you may have to route to another person and so forth. All right, so typically that's basically the technical part of it, because that brain dump, in order to get that information across, you are going to have to get everything together and chart out your workflow steps. So let's hop in to see what a workflow can actually do for you. So we're going to go ahead and create a simple workflow. All right, so in my workflow maintenance, you would see that you have one called batch approval, and you also have one called payables transaction approval. This is the one that we are going to use. Right, when you're choosing your modules, you have the option to choose between financial, sales, purchasing, payroll, and stuff like that. Right, today we're working on the purchasing module. Right, so let's go to payables. And we're going to actually create a new workflow step. All right, this payable invoice is going to, this payable approval, sorry, is going to be an invoice approval. It's going to be pretty simple. So I'm going to give my workflow name. I'm going to call it payables invoice approval. The description technically can be the same, or you can give it a little bit more information. So the description could actually be invoice approval, 10,000 and under. All right, you can name it anything you wish. We're going to save this workflow. All right, and then we're going to actually add a condition or step that would be in correlation to who we want the workflow to route to when it reaches a certain limit, right? So we're going to create a new workflow step. This workflow step would be 10,000 and under. All right, you guys could also attempt this workflow. Feel free to go ahead and attempt this. If you need any guidance or you have any questions, you could also reach out to us. So description, I'm going to leave it as the same amount. All right, and I'm going to save this step as well. Oh, sorry. Okay, so before I save this step, I'm going to actually add an assignment step. So let's do that. Now here you're presented with the workflow condition editor. Before I come to the screen, let me just explain a little bit about down here. So here you actually have the ability to assign who you want to be the approver of the workflow. So in this case, you can assign an Active Directory user. Let's try that. Okay, for some reason it's not finding my Active Directory user. Okay, so my computer froze just a little bit. Okay, so my VM seems to be giving some issues. It's freezing a lot. Okay. All right, it's showing that I have a John Doe user. Let's see if it finds that user. Okay, there we go. All right, so once you have added your Active Directory user, you are now able to set a time limit. The time limit indicates what is the length of time you're going to give this particular user to approve the workflow, right? You can also set up reminders. So that is going to indicate to the user that the time limit is almost about to expire. And you can also apply your holidays or vacation days within the workflow calendar. So it's not going to check those days as approval days. So for example, if you are going to be out the following day, you can set up where you want to delegate your workflow, or you can put in the calendar that you're going to be off on this day and not to treat it as a work day. And it's going to look at the 8-hour period from the following day. That way, it's not going to be held up within the queue waiting for your approval. All right. Let's go ahead and create a simple workflow step. So we're going to set where, and let's look for our PM transaction amount. And we want the document amount. PM transaction work document amount, right? And you can say where. You have quite a few options here. You have begins, contains, etc. But we are going to choose where it is greater. Sorry, where is less than, sorry, $10,000. And we're going to add this as our first workflow step. All right. Once you're okay with this, we can save this workflow. Right. We are also going to create another step. Right. Yes, we are also going to create another step. So I'm going to save this step. And I'm going to create a new step, and this step where it would be 50,000 and over. We'll give it a description here. And the same process where the PM transaction document amount and this one would be greater than includes 50,000. Now you can also explain the extended field list. Right? You would see a whole range of fields that you can choose from. So when you're doing this, just take a look at them and see what it is you want in your workflow. Right? So I'm satisfied with this. I'm going to click OK. Now I'm also going to pick who this gets assigned to, and I'm also going to assign this to John Doe. Now just remember, it works with Active Directory and not your GP user. All right, so we're going to add John Doe to this workflow step as well. Another thing, you can also add it to a group, a hierarchy, or also a workflow role. All right, you can add multiple persons. If it needs to go to a group of persons, that is, you can add more than one Active Directory account. So you can go to John Doe and anybody else in your organization. This time limit, we're also going to leave for 8 hours, right? Now this section here is the completion policy. So you have an idea if it is you want one person to approve or the majority must approve. So for example, if you have 3 persons assigned to this workflow step, therefore once 2 persons approve the workflow, it will move on to the next step. All right, so only 2 persons would need to respond in that case. And this last one, it's all persons need to approve. Now, you have the option where if the condition is not met, right, you can either continue it to the next step or you can reject this workflow. Now, if you have a more complicated workflow, then you can go inside of here and reject the workflow. Or if you want the workflow to move on to the next step, if the time period has lapsed, you have the option to do so. All right. So in my case, I'm just going to end my workflow path here. If your company is using the email functionality, you have the option to send messages via email. This is going to entail another setup within the system. So you will click send messages. Right, and this is the workflow document that it would be utilizing to send that message. You have the option to also, let's see if I am going to be able to, maybe not. All right. So you do have the option to also edit the message output that you would like your receivers to see. You can have the replies sent to various email addresses here. All right, you can input the name. Multiple names would be separated by semicolons. Right, you have the fields that are listed here in the workflow, for the workflow type fields, which you can embed into your document. Right, so whether it's the document date, whether it's the payment terms ID, PO number, etc., all of that can be embedded within the workflow document for your receivers to view. Once you have embedded all the document types that you want, you will click validate. The validation would just let you know that the fields match and everything is okay with the document, and you're able to send it. Now, let's save this workflow step. Now we have this following this. So I actually don't want that. I actually want this to be a separate step. And let's save it. So it'll be two independent steps. Now, usually there are persons who can override the workflow. That would be the system administrators of the system, the admins, etc. And when you're actually creating your workflow, you would select a manager to be assigned to the workflow, and that person would be able to override the workflow in question. Let me see if it's pulling the tag. No, so let's use let's see if it's using. Let's see who I am logged in here as. And it's not pulling the administrator. I would have loved to assign the administrator as well to it, but for some reason I don't know, it doesn't like it. Okay, so now it finds it. Okay, so it's giving a little bit of hiccups today, but that's okay. All right, so we'll add the administrator as the admin of this workflow. What that would mean, oops. And we'll also add, let's also add John Doe. So what that would mean is that our users are now going to be able to manage the workflow in question. Right, now you have some options here where you're able to send notification for the completed actions. In here, you are able to send a message, and this would be, if it's via email, you can send yourself a carbon copy just to be included in the workflow process, that you know when a workflow process has either been submitted, resubmitted, approved, rejected, delegated, etc. So I'm going to click submit. All right. I want to get an email for these workflow actions. So whether it's submitted, approved, rejected, recall, as well as final approval. If you are interested in receiving a carbon copy, you can add your Active Directory account, and your Active Directory account would be associated with an email. So you are able to also receive the workflow actions based on what is entered here. Now, if you want to allow an approver to delegate a task, and in the position that the approver may have some queries concerning one of the tasks that they need to approve, they have the option to also delegate to someone else. So they can probably give them further input on what it is they need to do, as well as they can also approve that workflow that you have delegated to this new person. The originator to be an approver, this is going to allow the person that created the workflow. So in this instance, it's the administrator that would have created this workflow. So the person that created the workflow is now going to be able to approve the workflow, right? So if you do not have this checked, it means that the persons that are under the workflow steps, the persons that you would have assigned those workflow steps to, those are the persons that will only be able to approve the workflow. There may be instances where you may need the originator to approve, be an approver of the workflow as well. So you can select this option. Always require one approver means that you're always going to need your workflow approved before you can have your workflow moved to the following step. And if you, for any reason, you need an alternate final approver, so it may have a hiccup where the workflow is just in the system, there's nobody to approve it, the final approver can go in and approve that workflow. Now, once you have select this option as active, it would then mean that the workflow can now be in use. I'm not sure why my managers did not show up. Okay. It did not allow administrator. Let's try again. Okay. I guess something is wrong with the administrator account. So we'll leave it as John Doe for now. And here you can select active. All right. My transaction window is open, so let me close that. All right. And let's save this workflow. Now our payables workflow has now been activated to be used throughout the payables process. So if it is I go under $10,000, I currently only have one person assigned. But if it is I had another person assigned, or multiple persons assigned, it's going to route to those persons for approval. Same if it is I'm going $50,000 and over, right? So if I go to purchasing, and let's bring up our transaction entry screen. All right, this bar indicates to us that we have workflows activated. So currently the payables invoice approval is not submitted. So we can go ahead and create our payables invoice, and it would require approval based on the steps that we have stipulated within the workflow maintenance. So let's go ahead and quickly create one. So we're going to use our vendor. Let's use Ace Travels. Okay, I think I have vendor. Okay, so we're going to use Allison 001. Of course, all this information is still inside of here as well. So we have the address, the remit, etc. We're going to give it a batch ID. We're going to call this test GP. All right, we're going to give this, yes, let's add this. Go ahead and save. We're going to give this a value of $10,000. All right, in the distributions, I just make sure your distributions are correct. Once you're okay with this, you click OK. Now, when you're using workflow, you have to use batch. It's not going to allow you to submit the workflow without a batch. So that's one thing to remember. So I can save this workflow because I'm okay with the workflow currently. Actually, let me just enter a document number and let me go ahead and save my voucher 459. Okay. So let's bring back up that workflow. So currently you see that the workflow is currently not submitted. So let's go ahead and submit that workflow. And I do apologize again, guys, my virtual machine is not behaving today. So once this has gone through completely, we can now pull back up this workflow payables transaction. And here you can now see, because we did a $10,000 payables invoice, it's pending approval from John Doe. Like I said, if it is you had multiple persons, you are going to see those persons showing up here on the bar. Because we have the workflow time limit for 8 hours, you're going to see that it's now due on the 21st of September at 9:50 a.m. Right? Like I said, a lot of things play into consideration where the time limit is concerned, because you can also set, as I mentioned, you can also set the workflow calendar. You can also set your holidays, your days off, etc. And that will actually tie in based on the dates that will actually tie in to your workflow. All right. So hopefully everyone is understanding thus far, right? Now you can go to the view history option. And here is going to give you a little bit more detail. You're going to see the steps that are associated with your workflow. You're going to see the comments that you left based on the approval process and the workflow that has been assigned to you. You're going to also see who are the persons that are currently working on this workflow. So currently I have system because I'm currently using the administrator account. So the assigned user currently is system in this case. If for some reason I had logged in under my John Doe Active Directory account, you would see that John Doe approved the workflow and it was actually sent to John Doe for approval. But in this case, the system, which is who I'm currently logged in as, which under administrator, I did the approval under the administrator account, right? You're going to see that we currently have the step where no action is taken if the workflow is overdue. So what this is going to mean, it's going to remain into the system until John Doe approves it, or if it is the manager goes in and approves this workflow, right? Now, all this information is saved until the end of time because this information is actually saved within your SQL Server. So this information is always going to be here. So for those of you who don't actively play inside of SQL, I mean, I don't advise that you do if you don't, but all the information that's stored inside of GP is stored into your SQL database. And you're able to pull that information into GP. So this information is also stored in the backend tables, and it will always be there for you to access. You can pull history reports based on this information. So it's pretty cool. All right. And also with the reports, you can also have those emailed to people as well. So you can do a smart list report and all of those various reports based on the information that you want to send to your user. Now that we see how easy it is to make a one-step workflow, you may say that's pretty easy, right? And it is pretty simple. It is pretty simple. So this is basically a one-step. With the two-step workflow, it's pretty much the same thing. And as I was showing you previously, where I canceled one step migrating into the other step, it's just a matter of connecting the workflow step to the previous one. So where I have $10,000 and under, this can be flowed into, okay, so I can't start it because I am currently in the workflow, but let's add a new step. All right, so it doesn't like that. So we could actually do a copy. All right, so just like that, we have created a copy of the previous workflow that we had. And you are now, because it's not currently active and we are not currently using it, I can come here if I wish, and I can actually let it flow into another workflow step. So it needs a two-step level approval, and I can save the step, and you can see it now filters down into the following step. So you have an idea as if you need to make more complex workflows, what you can do in terms of having one step flow into the other. So currently our steps here are two individual steps, as you can see. One does not flow into the other. And this is just a pretty simple, straightforward workflow. And we're going to use that. Now let's go to the report section. Under the reports, as I mentioned, you have the option to actually pull workflow reports. Oops. Now in the workflow reports, you do have the option to sort by type, user, completion date, due date. You also have a range where you would like to either sort by your workflow manager, what is the workflow type, the completion date of each workflow, the due date, the manager, etc. We're going to currently leave it as workflow type. And we're going to select our workflow, which is the payables transaction approval. Oops. And let's print this report. So here you can currently pull this report, and here you can see that currently it's pending approval from John Doe. We currently have the workflow that's pending approval, and we currently have the workflow for 50,000 and over. No action is currently needed at this time, right? Because we don't have a transaction in there for that amount. So you do have an idea as to the voucher number, the payable transaction entry number, and all that good stuff. All of this can be sent via email, so persons can have an idea if they need to pull a report. They have an idea of the different workflow types that are currently pending approval and who needs to approve what in the system. Now you can also pull up your information by the payables inquiry screen. That's another way that you can also view the workflow history. So it is actually a number of ways. So if it is you need to view all that historical information, you can do that. You have the option to go to your purchasing and then your inquiry screen. So let's go to the transaction by vendor. Let's pull up the vendor that we used. Right, so currently this is our invoice. So you can drill down into the invoice, and here you can see all the information about the invoice that was approved. You can go in from this screen and you can also view the history. All right, so it takes you back out to the history window where you can see all the steps in. Let's go ahead and also view it from the payables transaction area. Here you can see all payables transactions. Here you can see payables transactions that are not submitted. And here you can see the payables transactions that are currently pending approval. So if I click on pending approval, I should see my invoice that I would have created for $10,000. Now, because I am the creator of the invoice, I am also able to approve the invoice, and that's what you have seen. I was able to create it, and now you're going to see that I'm also going to be able to approve the invoice in the system as well. So under the John Doe, you do have the option to also recall the invoice. If for some reason you need to change the purchasing amount is not the correct amount, you need to have that change, you can have the workflow recalled, and that way it can be then resubmitted for approval. Under the workflow, let's go to the workflow setup pane. Under the workflow setup pane, here is where you're going to enable emails for workflow. So you would need to set the server name. The server name would be your SMTP server name, and you're going to set your basic credentials, which would be your username and password for your email address. You also have the option to approve via emails also. So not just being able to receive emails, but you're also going to be able to accept and reject, because not all the time you may have persons that are within GP that are required to approve a workflow. You may have managers who may be external and they may need access to approve within a system, and email actions is what you would set up for them to be able to do such. Once you have everything set up in your email settings window, you would test the email actions. You would send yourself a test email. You would enter your email address, click send test email, just to ensure that you receive the test so you know that it's working. Same goes for test email actions. If it's currently set up, once you select test email actions, it would let you know if it has been successfully set up or not. All right, so once you have set up your workflow emails and you have set up your workflow maintenance, window, you would be able to create each workflow step according to your organization and go ahead and approve your payables, or whether it's a batch approval, a transaction approval, whether it falls under purchase requisitions, you would be able to go into the system and approve the workflow as well. All right. I know I had a little bit of hiccup because my computer is currently lagging, but I hope you understand the process and how to set up your workflow and how to get your workflow to flow within GP so it can be assigned to the relevant persons for approval. All right. So I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. All right. So that will conclude the payables workflow webinar. I would definitely have another one on this webinar again. Today my VM just wasn't helpful. So when I sort out this issue, I'm definitely going to have another payables webinar again, and I hope to see you there. Thank you, guys.